Hello everyone, welcome to our cozy corner of the internet, where we dive into the mysterious and the suspenseful. I'm your storyteller, here to guide you through tales that will both intrigue and soothe you as you drift off to sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. The story is called Midnight Visitor in the Pigsty. It happened on a late summer night at my uncle's hog farm in rural Iowa, where the air was heavy with the scent of hay and manure, and cicadas droned in the field. I was there to help with chores before heading back to my trailer for the night. After feeding the pigs at dusk, I scrubbed the troughs and stacked clean water buckets along the wooden fence. The last rays of sun painted the silos gold, while the sky shifted to indigo. My uncle had gone inside the barn for paperwork. I lingered by the fence, enjoying the stillness before darkness fully settled. By 10 p.m. the barn lights were off and the pigs were silent. Curled in their straw-lined pens, I carried my flashlight toward my trailer when a low grunt made me freeze. It was loud, deeper than any hog's call, reverberating through the still air. I frowned, straining to hear more. I told myself it was just a stray boar or the wind rattling metal siding. I shook my head and resumed walking. A moment later, a sudden squeal, sharp and terrified, tore through the night. My heart thumped as I spun toward the barn door. The latch had clicked open, an ease prickled my skin. I stepped toward the door, shining my light inside. The beam swept over empty pens, no pigs, no uncle. Beyond the farthest trough, a series of hoof-like prints stained the straw. They were too large, too wide, as if made by a creature built half man, half hawk. I swallowed hard and called out, "Uncle Mike!" My voice echoed among the wooden beams. No answer, only the distant thud of something heavy shifting in the rafters. The air felt colder. I edged inside, every creak of the floorboards sending my pulse higher. At the center of the barn, I found muddy hoofprints, leading up to the feed trough where the pellets were scattered on the floor. A thin mist had drifted in, swirling around my ankle. I bent to pick up a handful of fiddly to find it mixed with coarse, dark hairs. My flashlight beam quivered as I raised my head. From the shadows beyond the pens, I heard a low, gurgling grunt, a sound no hog could make. I backed away, bumping into a wooden post. The beam caught movement. A hulking silhouette crouched against the back wall, shoulders hunched, tusks gleaming in the dim light. Fear froze me in place. The creature stood slowly, its limbs bending with a heavy crack, its ice mold piggish and filled with malice locked. Onto my face it tilted its head, emitting a wet snort that echoed like a challenge. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. My light slipped, illuminating tufts of hair along its spine. I turned and ran, boots hammering the wooden floor as I veered between pens, yanking down gates behind me. The creature's heavy steps followed, shaking the barn. It grunted angrily, slamming snout first to a gate I'd just latched. Splinters flew as it forced its way in. Outside, the moon was hidden behind clouds, and the mist curled around my ankles. I ran for the trailer, glancing back to see the shape looming in the doorway, tusks glinting. It snorted one last time, a wet, triumphant sound, before retreating into the darkness of the barn. I slammed and locked the trailer door, my chest heaving. Inside, the radio crackled with tanite country music, and the hum of the fridge was oddly comforting. I stared at my shaking hands as the mist faded from the window. When morning came, Uncle Mike found the barn door wide open and splintered in the straw. He saw the same massive footprints leading toward the cornfield. We cleaned up the mess, but never mentioned the creature. To this day, I avoid the hob barn after dark. Sometimes, on still nights, I swear I hear a distant grunt and the scrape of hooves on wood, and I know that somewhere in the dark, the hungry eyes of that pigman are watching. This is the end of the first story of the night. Next is the second story of the night. The story is called The Cry in the Corn Maze. On a crisp October evening, I took my 6-year-old daughter Lily to the annual harvest corn maze at Crowley Farm, local tradition for generations. 10 acres of towering stalks formed a labyrinth. Under the pale moonlight, families drifted in small clusters, their laughter echoing between the rows. We followed a wide dirt path between neat rows, illuminated by a few flickering lanterns hung from wooden posts. The cornstalks rustled in the gentle breeze, sounding almost like whispered voices. Lily skipped ahead, humming the tune of a Halloween song. I reminded her to stay closeted. Maze was famous for confusing even the most seasoned explorers. The path bent left, then right, the stalks pressing in so tightly that no moonlight reached the ground at my feet. A half-mile in, I paused at a fork in the path and checked the map we'd been handed at the entrance. The paper was already creased and smudged, but I pointed Lily down the right branch toward a marker labeled Pumpkin Patch. She squealed with delight at that idea. Yet after 10 minutes of walking, the pumpkin patch never appeared, only an endless sea of stalks swaying like silent sentinels. That's when I first heard it, a soft, plaintive wail that drifted through the stalks, like a baby crying in the distance. I stopped and listened. Lily tugged my sleeve. "Mom, do you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, heart pounding, and said, "It's just a recording someone left hidden." I forced a reassuring smile, but the cry came again, closer this time. I reached down and took Lily's hand. "Let's move toward the exit," I said, trying to sound confident. We hurried back toward the fork, but the path looked different, no sign of the split I just passed. My breath caught as I realized the stalks behind us had shifted, closing off the route we'd come. Confusion overtook me. I fumbled the map again, turning it over and over, but the rows all looked identical. Lily squeezed my hand. "Mom, the baby's crying is really loud now." I swallowed. The wail had become a chorus echoing through every row and turning into a desperate sob. My mind raced. Why would someone play that recording in a family maze? I shone my flashlight forward, spotting 2 paths. One led uphill toward a platform in the center. The other plunged deeper into the darkest stalks. I hesitated, then decided the platform might give us a view of the correct path. We climbed a narrow ramp. Lily's small boots clattered on wooden planks. At the top, the flashlight illuminated a clearing ringed by corn, and I saw the metal frame of a harvest platform. But from below came renewed crying, louder and more frantic. Lily's eyes filled with tears. I swept the light across the corn walls and saw pinned to one stalk a ragged cloth doll with button eyes. Beneath it, a crude message scrawled in dark mud, "She's here." My heart thundered. I gathered Lily close and whispered, "Stay calm. Let's get down and find the exit another way." I turned to descend, but the ramp had shifted. Its boards creaked and bent like the stalks themselves. Fear seized me. I scooped Lily into my arms and dashed back toward the maze's edge. The cries erupted from every direction now, above, below, Oh, around hurting my ears, I stumbly by memory. Somehow we burst through the final row, spilling onto the gravel path outside. I pressed Lily against me, heart pounding. She sobbed softly. "Mom, I'm scared." I stroked her hair and whispered, "You're safe now." Behind us the maze stood silent, its cornstalks swaying only in the gentle breeze. The distant lanterns blinked out as workers closed the paths for the night. We walked hand in hand to the parking lot. The laughter and music of other families had faded into uneasy quiet. I glanced back once. Shadows among the stalks seemed to shift, and I thought I saw a tiny figure standing at the maze's mouth, an infant's form. Then it was gone. That night, Lily fell asleep instantly in the car. I drove her home beneath a sky streaked with dawn. I never did find out who or what was crying in that maze. Sometimes, though, when the wind rustles through our backyard cornstalks, I swear I can hear a faint, distant wail, calling me and Lily back into the shadows. That's it for the second story of the night. Next is the third story of the night. The story is called Whispers from the Old Barn. I moved to my great-grandfather's farmstead in central Wisconsin last spring, drawn by the promise of wide fields and the chance to restore the century-old barn that had stood empty since my grandmother's youth. The paint was long gone, and the red boards were weathered gray, but I saw potential, a workshop, storage, even a space for community gatherings. All I needed were tools, elbow grease, and time. I spent the first week clearing brush and stacking old planks beside the barn. By day, I replaced broken boards and reinforced beams with fresh lumber. The late May sun beat down and the smell of pine sawdust filled the air. I found rusted farm tools hanging on nails, old milk pails, and a heavy iron latch that still swung open and shut in daylight. The barn felt alive with history, and I imagined friends gathering inside. On the seventh day, I pried loose a warped floorboard to fit a support brace and uncovered a leather-bound journal wedged in the dirt below. The cover bore no title, only the initials E.H. in faded gold leaf. My heart skipped. I dusted it off, opened the brittle pages, and discovered neat, tight handwriting, dated 1918. I brought it to my workbench and read by flashlight. The first entries belonged to Ellis Huxley, a neighborly farmer who once owned the barn. He described tending to his daughters during the great influenza epidemic, converting the loft into an infirmary when decaying barns were used to quarantine the sick. He wrote of coughing fits echoing among the hay bales, of prayers whispered through cracked barn doors, and of shadows that moved on their own. His hand shook when he drew a crude sketch of a hidden room beneath the floorboards. That night, I stayed late to patch a hole in the rafters and noticed a distant murmur echoing under the boards. Soft chant so low, I almost blamed the wind. I climbed down, heart thudding, and the words drifted up. Lord have mercy. If I shone my flashlight across the fresh lumber and the old beams. All was silent. My breaths came fast. I told myself it was my imagination stirred by Alice's diary, and I went home. The next afternoon I found strange symbols scratched on a support post, small crosses flanked by dots, nearly erased by time. I cleared away spider webs to expose a smudge of dried blood on the wood grain. My stomach knotted. The diary mentioned these markings as sanctified symbols Alice used to ward off the restless dead. That evening, after supper, I returned with a recording device and a small lantern. At precisely 11, the barn fell into unsettling stillness. I placed the recorder on a plank and sat cross-legged listening. After 10 minutes I heard it again, an urgent whisper. "Help us!" I replayed the tape, heart pounding. The words were distinct, desperate. Chills crept up my spine. I spent the next day restless, avoiding the barn's shadow. But night came and I had to know more. I climbed inside at midnight, flashlight in hand, replaying Ellis's mention of the hidden room. The floorboards trembled under my weight as I knelt and pried up the same warped plank. Beneath lay a narrow crawl space, damp and reeking of mold and stale straw. I crawled through the hatch, scraping my knees, and found myself in a low chamber, barely 6 feet wide. Dim lantern light from above spilled through a grate in the floor. Along the walls were iron cots, each with shredded blankets, stained dark. At the far end lay a small wooden table, and on it a rusted chalice and a tarnished cross. My flashlight landed on a final diary entry nailed to the wall. Ellis's last words. He confessed that too many had died here, that in his grief he'd bound their souls beneath these beams with chants and broken vows. He begged forgiveness and vowed to release them once he joined them in death. The last line ended with a jagged slash through the page. A sudden gust of cold air blew past me, the grate above rattled. I shivered and raised my recorder, capturing a new sound. Low chanting, rising from the rafters, sepulchral and urgent. I scrambled backward, hitting my head on the table, my lantern tumbling to one side. Panic gripped me. I scrambled to my feet and fled back through the hatch as the chanting swelled to a guttural crescendo. My lantern lay shattered outside, but moonlight guided me out of the barn. I ran across the yard, hearing behind me the sound of wooden beams groaning, as if the barn itself was exhaling. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I packed the tool locks and taped plywood over every window and door of the barn. The old beams and the hidden chamber remained undisturbed inside, but the low creaks and sighs no longer reached me. Weeks later, I sold the property. Now I live in town, far from that barn. Yet some nights, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I can hear a distant chorus of whispers carried on the breeze. Release us. And I know those trapped souls are still waiting beneath the timbers, longing for the promise Ellis made a century ago. This is the end of the third story for tonight. Next is the fourth story for tonight. The story is called Ghosts of the Abandoned Dairy. My wife, Sarah, our 2 young sons, and I moved into the old Larson dairy farm on the outskirts of Marquette, Michigan. The house was modest, but the red-painted barn loomed large behind it, its doors sagging and windows boarded. We'd heard rumors that the Larsons had shut down when the market collapsed, leaving everything milking equipment, 4 sows and in place. We were eager to restore the property and raise grass-fed beef. We had no idea what memories still lingered in the stalls. That first evening, after unpacking, I wandered into the barn to inspect our new milking stall setup. The air inside smelled of stale hay and metal. At one end, a row of fiberglass cow forms used to train calves stood, lined like silent sentinels. I ran my hand over a dust-covered udder, shrugging off a chill. I replaced the barn lights and locked the door harness, unaware that something had watched me from the darkness of the hayloft. The next night, around 10 p.m., Sarah and I were tucking the boys into their beds when we heard the barn lights snap on. We exchanged worried glances. The timer was set to daylight hours only. I grabbed my jacket and walked out to the cold night air. In the barn, every light bulb glowed, casting elongated shadows. I heard heavy, uneven footsteps echoing between the stalls, and soft, labored breathing. My heart pounded as I flicked my flashlight across the fiberglass chasm now smeared with wet, dark mud. I backed out and bolted the door. My flashlight caught muddy hoofprints, leading from the feed trough past the mannequins. Toward the far corner, the prints were too small, no real cow could leave such tracks. I froze, staring at the stall where the largest fiberglass cow had shifted slightly. Its head turned toward me. I snapped a picture and retreated to the house, locking every door. Sarah looked at my phone in alarm. The image showed clean, shiny, fiberglass, no mud at all. That night, I set up a motion-activated camera in the barn, hoping to catch the intruder. I placed it on a stool beside the models, then returned to bed, sleep eluding me. At 2:13 a.m., the camera blinked on. I hurried out again. Reviewing the footage on my phone, I saw a tall, gaunt shape emerge through the open door. First, a hunched silhouette, then a mass of long, matted hair draped over shoulders, nose dragging the ground like a muzzle. It moved between the models, admiring them with a low, happy grunt. My breath caught. I watched it pause before the mannequins, pressing its face against the plastic hide, as if tasting them. Then it knelt, one arm propped on a metal feed bucket, and began to stroke the other with a wet, sticky hand. It clutched the bucket to its chest, gurgled with delight, and inhaled deeply its breath, stinking of decay. I dropped the phone and stumbled backward into the barn door, nearly falling. The shape froze then, slammed the door shut. My ears rang as I heard furious banging on the other side, hooves striking wood, the sound of hurried, cloven footsteps. I pressed my shoulder into the door, screaming for Sarah to call the police. The banging stopped abruptly. Silence. I backed away slowly and crept around to the house. Peering through the kitchen window, the barn stood dark and still. The models gone. We spent that night huddled in the living room. At dawn, I approached the barn with the police, locked in a squad car. We found hoofprints all around the walls, and in the soft earth, outside dozens of them. Inside, mud was smeared on every stanchion and feed trough, but no sign of footprints leading the way. The fiberglass cows were gone, vanished without a trace. We never moved back in. The farm went up for sale, and we left Marquette that summer. But sometimes, when the wind shifts just right and the moon is high, I swear I hear a distant grunt and the scrape of hooves on wood, as if those creatures are out there, searching for their models. This is the end of the 4th story for tonight. Next is the 5th story for tonight. It was the last week of September on my uncle's wheat farm in western Kansas. The fields stretched in golden waves beneath an endless prairie sky. My cousin Jake and I had been running the combine around the clock. Each night we burned diesel headlamps and tracked dusty rows, while the horizon glowed with dying sunset. We laughed at exhaustion and swapped stories in the cab, confident we'd finish by dawn, never imagining the harvest had another plunge. On the 5th night, just past midnight, our combine lurched and coughed, grinding to a stop in the center of a field. Jake cursed under his breath. "Not now," he muttered, slamming the control panel. I climbed down to inspect the grain elevator belt. The engine idled unevenly, and a sharp metallic ping echoed from the rear. I shone my flashlight into the engine compartment, but all I saw were familiar hoses. "Looks like the tensioner's gone," I said. "We'll have to fix it." Jake locked the wheels and I grabbed my toolkit. The air was cold and still, and the combine's headlights were the only bright spots in the dark. As I knelt to tighten a bearing, I thought I heard another engine start, somewhere beyond our row deep in the field. Where there had been no road, I paused, listening, but the prairie wind died down. I rose and walked to the front of the machine, peering into the night. Nothing moved but the dark wheat shifting in the wind. I shook my head and returned to Jake. We worked in silence until the belt clicked back into place. The combine hummed back to life, swallowing grain and spitting chaff into the air. We worked another hour before Jake radioed that his machine was done. He'd finished the north field and was heading back to the yard. As he drove away, his headlights receded into the darkness. I felt a sudden emptiness in the cab's glow. The only other light was a distant glow to the east, near the trees, where we'd parked the tractor. But it was irregular, a single headlamp blinking, as if someone signaled for help. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed down again. The gravel path between fields was deserted. I walked toward the blinking light, heart thumping, expecting to find Jake tinkering in the dark. Instead, I saw the outline of another combine identical to ours, its cab light blinking in sequence. 2 flashes, a pause, 3 flashes. I shone my beam on the side. No farm logo, no license plate, just rust and dents. "Jake?" I called. My voice trembled. The cab door was open, the engine silent. I climbed onto the ladder and peered inside. The seat was empty except for a pair of muddy work boots resting on the floor. No keys on the ignition, no radio playing. I shone my flashlight across the console and saw a name scratched into the metal. J. Brown. That wasn't Jake's name. I climbed down unsettled. The blinking sequence repeated. 2 flashes, pause, 3 flashes. My mind raced Morse code. 2 short, 3 long. The letter U. It pulsed again. U, U. I backed away, heart pounding, and turned toward the yard. The regular glow of the barn lights beckoned like safety. As I hurried back, I heard the distant rumble of a combine engine starting. I paused, listening, then broke into a sprint. The engine's roar grew louder. But it wasn't Jake's machine. It had a deeper, more hollow growl. I dared one glance behind. The unknown harvester barreled toward me, its blinking headlight flickering like an angry eye. I dove off the path into the stubbled field, rolling into cut stalks beneath me. The stalks clattered as the harvester thundered past. Scarcely inches away, I scrambled up and ran toward the barn. Behind me, the machine's engine faded, but my ears rang with its dying growl. I reached the yard and threw myself into the combine Jake had left running. He'd circled back under the barn lights to clear debris. He slammed the door shut. "What's wrong?" he shouted. I choked out, "There's another machine. It's picking up code. It nearly ran me down." His eyes went wide. We dropped the combines and rushed into the house. Behind us, the barn lights blinked off. One by one, in the silence, we heard a final engine kicker growl so distant it sounded like thunder. Weeks later, when the frost came, we finished the harvest by dawn. In the morning light, the stubble fields were empty of any tracks beyond our own. The woods bordering the north ridge showed no sign of a foreign machine. Only the echoes of its growl remained in my memory, and the blinking letter U, urging me to come back for one more run. This is the end of the 5th story for tonight. Next is the 6th story for tonight. The story is called Red Fingerprints in the Fertilizer Pile. Last November I just started as a night farmhand on a family-run corn farm in central Nebraska. The season's last fertilizer deliveries were due before the first frost, so I was tasked with checking the bulk fertilizer bin after sunset. I'd worked days on livestock and equipment, but this was my first time alone at the old shed under the moonlight's glow. The fertilizer shed was a high-walled concrete bunker with a wide metal door and a grated floor above a sealed pit. A faint ammonia tang hung in the night air, and overhead lights flickered on motion sensors. I lifted the latch and pushed the door open. Inside, piles of dusty granules formed a sloping hill from the grated floor to halfway up the back wall. I aimed my light at the heap's fertilizer, as pale as chalk then froze. Along one face of the pile, a single red human handprint stood out. The fingers splayed and pressed deep into the dust. It looked like blood, but none of our fertilizer. My heart thundered as I stepped closer. I brushed my gloved fingertip across the print. It smeared like wet paint. Leaving a bright streak, I wiped the smear on my jacket sleeve. The residue felt sticky, almost oily, and smelled faintly metallic. I realized with a jolt that no one had been here before me. This print must be fresh. I backed away suddenly, aware of every sound. The distant hum of the grain dryer, the soft drip of condensation, the scrape of wind against corrugated metal. Then a faint rustle deep in the pile. I shone my light down the slope and caught something. More red imprints, smaller this time, like a child's palm and fingers, smeared along broken kernels of fertilizer. Adrenaline surged. I fumbled for my radio and whispered to the farmhouse, "You need to come out here now." My partner, Emily, crackled back, voice groggy. "What's wrong?" I swallowed and said, "Blood prints. In the bin." I waited, scanning for movement. The piles shifted as if settling, but I could have sworn I saw it rise, a mound forming at the center. I backed out of the bin and slammed the door shut, locking it. My flashlight's beam traced frantic circles. Minutes later, Emily arrived with 2 flashlights and a crowbar. Her light joined mine through the slits at the bottom of the door, and she asked, "What did you see?" I unstrapped my glove, pointed at the smeared red streak on the metal edge, and said, "Fingerprints. Fresh." She pried the door open, and we stepped inside together. I shone my light on the Pileno sign of prints. Only the pale granules, level, as if untouched. I squatted down and brushed aside loose fertilizer at the bottom. A torn scrap of fabric snagged on a piece of rebar. It was soft cotton, patterned in pastel flowers like a child's pajamas. My stomach lurched. I dug deeper with my gloved hands until my fingers struck something hard. I pulled out a small rubber boot, caked in fertilizer dust and stained red along the heel. Beneath it was a tiny skeletal hand, knuckles picked clean by time, the small bones slick with damp soil. I staggered up, choking on bile. Emily screamed and stumbled back. I grabbed her arm. "We need to call this in now." Her hands shook as she dialed the sheriff. The bin behind us echoed with the thud of something shifting, hollow, wet thunk, as if something fell deeper into the pit. The lights swung, and in each beam I thought I saw more tiny bones glinting where fertilizer had collapsed away. We ran to the farmhouse, lights, doors banging behind us. The night air bit at our faces, Emily stayed on the phone as I steeled myself to return with deputy. When the sheriff's truck headlights swept over the yard, the fertilizer bin stood silent and still. Deputies pried it open, and I backed away, eyes squeezed shut. When I finally looked, the bin was empty of any bones or clothing, only a small smear of red along the rim. The sheriff frowned. "Maybe rats scattered everything," he said. "But why leave those prints above, etched so perfectly?" I shivered. No rodents could lift the child's boot or smear a bloody palm so high. Weeks later, I found that cotton scrap pinned to a bulletin board at the farm office, placed by someone without comment. The printout labeled the missing child from 2 decades ago. A little girl who vanished near these fields one cold autumn night. Her body never found. Now, every time I pass the fertilizer shed at dusk, I glance at the rim for red fingerprints and listen for the soft scrape of tiny bones shifting beneath the dust. This is the end of the 6th story for tonight. Next is the 7th story for tonight. The story is called The Cornfield Ghost Light. It began in late July, when the warm nights drew clouds of moths to my cousin's corn farm. In southern Iowa, he'd grown up watching his grandfather clamp a row of propane lanterns along the field's edge. I'd come to help with the evening shift, walking between tall stalks, checking traps, and reigniting the flickering lights. The air was thick with humidity, and the low hum of crickets, perfect for the old tradition to chase away insects. Or so we thought. On the first night, I carried a lantern and a can of propane along the north boundary. Each lantern stood on a 6-foot stake, its blue flame dancing behind glass. I lit them one by one and watched the moths recoil from the glow. Fluttering back into the rows, the corn stalks whispered around me. I felt safe in their rustling chorus until I noticed a second light far beyond the lantern's reach, shimmering between 2 stalks. As if in midair, I froze, staring at that distant glow. It pulsed with an uneven rhythmiter, dimmer, then gone. My heart pounded as I raised my flashlight and swept the beam across the row. No lantern stood there, and no clouds of moths, just stalk and the damp earth. I shook my head, rationalizing it as a car's taillight or a trick of heat haze. But when I walked forward, the glow snapped back on behind me, closer, now hovering inches above a corn husk. I stumbled back, breath caught in my throat. The ghost light drifted toward me, leaving a faint trail of phosphorescence. I watched in disbelief as it wove between 5 stalks, growing stronger with each pulse. The usual hum of insects faded into silence. I flicked the lantern on my belt, and for an instant the 2 lights, lantern and ghost light, burned side by side. Then the ghost light winked out, and in its place stood a shape, tall, thin, and bent at odd angles within the corn rows. I shone my flashlight on the shape. It retreated into shadow. My knees shook. I fumbled for my radio and whispered for Jake. "Something's out here." His crackled reply came. "I'll be there in 5. I heard his footsteps crunching on gravel behind the house. Meanwhile, I kept the flashlight trained on the rows, expecting movement. The stalks parted, and a figure stepped out. It wore tattered overalls and a wide-brimmed straw hat, face hidden in darkness. But its hands glowed faintly where the fingertips should be. Jake arrived and clicked on his spotlight. Together we chased the glow deeper into the field. Each time we swept the beam, the ghost light darted away. We called its name, knelt in the dusty rows, but found nothing but footprints. 2 sets of bare prints, elongated and webbed at the toes, pressed into the packed earth. My skin crawled. We pressed on until the rows ended at the old irrigation pivot. There the last lantern flickered out. The ghost light hovered above the ground, bathing the metal wheel in cold glow. It turned its head toward us and spoke no words, just a keening sigh like wind through corn stalks. Then it raised one luminous hand and beckoned. Jake hesitated. I felt the same pull, curiosity mixed with dread. The figure drifted toward the pivot, its overalls stained with soil and something dark and glistening. As it passed under the moonlight, I saw dozens of tiny pin-sized punctures in its arms like larvae had hatched. I swallowed hard and called out, "What do you want?" The figure paused, then turned and drifted east toward the neighbor's corn. Jake and I glanced at each other, then sprinted after it. We followed its path for half a mile, boots slipping in loose dirt, until we reached a low-lying ditch. The ghost light descended and settled on the ground. We expected it to vanish, but instead it burned steadily, revealing an overturned. With pounding hearts, we hauled the door free and pried it open. A dank, fetid stench rose from below. I shone my light down the shaft. Rough wooden steps led into darkness. The ghost light floated at the top, flickering like a judgment. Jake whispered, "We shouldn't," but I was already climbing down. I landed on damp soil and held the beam high. The shaft opened into a low cavern, smeared with rotting husks and broken cobs. In the center lay a ring of charred cornstalks, scorched as though by a witch's torch. At the ring's heart, dozens of writhing larvae, glowing faint red, feasted on a shattered ear of corn. Their bodies pulsed in unison, feeding that soft light overhead. My stomach turned. The ghost light drifted down, joining their feast. I staggered back, tripping over a loose cob and crashing into the wall. Jake's flashlight beam shook as he climbed down. He looked at me, eyes wide. "We need to leave," he said, voice trembling. I nodded. My own voice gone, we scrambled up the ladder as the larvae's light grew stronger, spilling red glow into the shaft. The chamber behind us seemed to inhale the air, vibrating with the hum of those tiny mouths. We burst into the night and slammed the trapdoor shut, locking it with a rock. We ran without looking back. Through the cornstalks, past the profane lantern, snow deadened, into the yard in the house. Lights flickered as though responding to our flight. The next morning, I went back to the pivot with Jake. We lifted the trapdoor and shone lights down. No larvae, no scorched stalks, only cold earth and the faint smell of ammonia. The barn lights were solar-powered and dead after a cloudy night. I pocketed a small piece of charred husk as proof, but when I showed it to Jake, it crumbled into nothing. I quit that job 2 days later. I still drive by the farm on summer nights, and sometimes I see a single ghost light hovering over the pivot, pulsing in the dark. I'll slow down, remembering those glowing larvae and the scent of rotten husks, and pray I never have to relight those lanterns again. This is the end of the 7th story for tonight. Next is the 8th story for tonight. The story is called Groans from the Haystack. Last October, I was hired to help a friend, Marcus, on his small horse farm in upstate New York. The mornings were already crisp, and each evening we carried fresh bales of hay from the barn loft down to the paddocks for bedding. On my 3rd night, after stacking the last bale by the corral, I noticed an old unused haystack against the north wall, weather gray and covered in cobwebs. Marcus said it had been there for decades. No one ever touched it now. Curiosity tugged at me, but the chill in the air made me hurry back to the farmhouse. That night, I lay awake, listening to the wind sweep across empty fields. Around midnight, I heard it, a low, mournful moan drifting through the barn doors. It sounded like someone in pain, echoing off wooden beams. I sat up, heart thumping, and slipped on boots. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the barn entrance. Between the stalls and the tack room, I passed the door to the old haystack. The moan had become a soft groan, a breath of misery trapped in straw. My skin crawled, but I pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. Inside, the air was colder and heavy with dust. My flashlight beam revealed layers of golden hay, matted and darkened with age. I panned the light over the tangle of stalks, expecting to find a frightened animal. Then I heard scratching. Wooden nails scraping deep inside the pile. I froze and listened. The scratching gave way to another groan, single and hollow, as though someone tried to speak through a mouthful of straw. My heart raced. I backed out slowly, but the groan rose again, closer this time, urging me to return. The next morning I told Marcus about the sounds. He frowned and said the stack had never been used, because once, years ago, a stable hand went missing. After checking its temperature heat, detectors showed a sudden spike. They searched for days, but found no trace. I shivered at the tale. Marcus sealed the door and said he would burn the old hay pile before winter. I nodded, but a knot tightened in my gut. I had to see what lay inside. That evening, after supper, I carried a machete and my strongest flashlight back to the barn. I pried off the latch and pushed the door wide. The beam cut through darkness to a small recess at the stack's base. I knelt and parted the edges of loose hay. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled out a rusted tin box. My breath caught. It was sealed with nails and a corroded hasp. The stack groaned as though in pain. My eyes stung in the loft's gloom as I pried the hasp open. Inside lay a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth tied with fraying rope. Then I unwound the rope. Beneath the cloth was the tiny form of a child bones, picked clean to white by time. Her fingers curled around a half-chewed straw. A child's bonnet lay nearby, faded pink with dried mud. I stumbled back, gagging, as the tin box flipped shut on its own. The trembling beam of my flashlight caught movement. The haystack's surface rippled as though something burrowed below. I swung my machete, slicing a handful of grass free. A guttural growl erupted from inside the mound. I dropped the machete and sprinted for the barn door, the stack roaring moaning behind me. I flung the door shut, bolted it, and ran back to the farmhouse, hands pressed to my mouth. Marcus met me on the porch, panic in his eyes. I told him the child in the box. He went pale and said, "We have to call the sheriff." We dialed 911, but as we waited, a final groan rolled through the barn walls. Then silence. Police arrived an hour later, searched the barn, but found neither bones nor box, only old hay and the corpse of a rat. The next day we burned the haystack. Flames leaped under a gray sky. Ashes scattered across the field. Marcus packed up and left the farm for good. I moved on too, but sometimes when the wind rustles to fall grass, I swear I hear a small distant cry. This is the end of the 8th story. For tonight, next is the 9th story for tonight. The story is called The Barn's Hidden Camera. I work on a dairy farm outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and last summer I set up a night vision camera inside our old tobacco barn to catch trespassers. I'd heard rumors of prowlers stealing equipment, and the barn's windows were too small to peek through. My plan was simple: mount the camera on a beam, point it at the open stall door, and record every midnight hour until we had evidence. That first night, I checked the footage in the early morning. The grainy monochrome video showed empty stalls, a ripple of dust drifting in a stray beam, and the soft hum of the camera. At 2:13 a.m., a pair of glowing eyes flickered at the far edge of the frame, too low for a deer, too narrow for a cat. I paused, the video heart thumping, but the eyes vanished in the next frame. The next night, I secured the camera tighter and added a small red LED to show its position. At midnight, the barn was silent, except for distant crickets and the soft sway of rafters. I checked the footage at dawn, screensaver like static. Then the red LED blinked off for 10 seconds, then back on. No shadows crossed the stall, just the tremor in the beam, as if something passed behind the camera. On the third night, I decided to patrol the barn myself. I grabbed my flashlight, left the door ajar, and walked the stalls. My beam revealed nothing but feed buckets and empty halter hook. A sudden rustle made me spin. A loose shutter banged against the wall. I laughed at my own nerves and locked up, leaving the camera to finish its run. At breakfast, I plugged the SD card into my laptop. The first hour was normal. Then at 3:07 a.m. the feed jumped to life. A dark shape slithered across the stall door, its form elongated, limbs bending at wrong angles. It paused, head cocked, and stared into the camera with hollow eyes. The next frame was blank. The barn door closed tight. I replayed it. There was no sound, only that blinking shape. I realized the camera's mic was recording. I listened. The barn's usual creaks, a soft sigh, then a muffled thump, as if the shape had dropped off camera view. I felt my skin prickle. I closed the laptop and drove to the farm office, determined to shut down the experiment. That afternoon, I removed the soldered memory card and replaced the camera with a dummy. The barn looked ordinary in daylight, hay bales stacked neatly, sunlight filtering through slats. I shrugged at my own superstition and left, hoping the phantom would go away. On the fifth night, I couldn't resist checking back in. I cracked open the file. The entire hour was blank until the last 5 minutes. The dummy camera swivels as if on a motor mount, then freezes on a close-up shot of the red LED's reflection in 2 eyes, babies. They blinked once, slow and deliberate, before vanishing. I stared at the frozen frame. Those eyes seemed to watch me back. I felt my pulse jump. I shut the laptop, but the memory card slot glowed faintly in the darkened room. I thought I saw movement in the corner of my ear, shadow passing behind me. I tossed the card into my coat pocket and left, the laptop screen still showing the frozen eyes. 2 nights later, I went back with Marcus. He laughed when I told him, but agreed to check the barn. We cleared the dummy camera and found nothing. No cables disturbed, no scuff mark, just the old stall door, slightly ajar. We closed and locked it, then stood in the gravel yard under the stars, listening to nothing but our own breath. That morning, I deleted the footage. I thought erasing the evidence would end it. But once I'd cleared the files, the final frame reappeared. My stomach churned. I ejected the card and smashed it with a hammer, metal pieces scattering. Now I refuse to set foot in the barn after dusk, but sometimes, when I drive past on my way home, In the glass, I swear, I see two red pinpoints watching me from inside, waiting for the next night's recording. This is the end of the 9th story for tonight. Next is the 10th story for tonight. The story is called Midnight Rounds of the Landowner. I first learned of Old Man Thatcher's legend when I moved onto the 800-acre wheat and barley farm his family had worked since the 1800s. The fields lay open to a horizon of dark pines, and at night the farmhouse stood alone under endless stars. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones after Thatcher died in a riding accident decades ago. His ghostly patrol began, circling Rose on a phantom horse. I was skeptical until I heard the hooves myself. It happened that first September night. I was finishing evening chores, checking the irrigation pumps and locking the barn, when I paused at the edge of the south field. The air was cool, cut by sporadic crickets. Then, faint but unmistakable, came a thundering clip-clop, the measured rhythm of hooves on hard soil. I shone my flashlight across the stubble. Nothing, yet the sound rode the breeze, growing nearer, then fading toward the old stone fence. Over the next week, I heard it again each night, around 8:30, always from the same direction. The east field, where Thatcher's great-grandfather once planted oats. I'd hurry outside, with my lantern heart pounding, and walk toward the sound. The hoofbeats ceased at a solitary elm tree. In its shadow, I saw a dim lantern glow. Then, just before I reached the spot, the light vanished, leaving only the rustle of leaves. On the 8th night, curiosity won. I saddled my mare Daisy and led her out into the field under a crescent moon. I carried only a lantern and a pocket knife, enough to signal rather than startle. We rolled the soil path toward the elm. Halfway there, a beam of pale light appeared over the ridge, the ghost lantern bobbing in time with unseen hooves. Daisy shivered and nickered. I urged her forward. At the top of the rise, the lantern bobbed into view. Beneath it stood a rider on a dark horse, brimmed hat pulled low. I called out, my lantern shaking, "Mr. Thatcher." No answer, only the horse's soft snort. I raised my light higher. The rider leaned forward, face in shadow, then raised one gloved hand and pointed east. The horse's hoof struck once, then twice, then thundered down the far slope. I tried to follow, urging Daisy down the ridge, but the slope gave way to tilled earth, and she stumbled. The light and hoofbeats faded below the horizon. I called again, voice raw, but the fields answered only with night winds. Daisy nickered anxiously as I turned her back toward home, lantern bobbing with each step. I told Marcus the next morning, but he only raised his eyebrows. "Thatcher's rounds," he said with a shrug. "He inspects the fields one last time each autumn. They say checking the fences, the crops, making sure nothing's missed before winter claims the land." That evening, over coffee, he showed me an old photograph. Thatcher in a frock coat, astride a bay horse, lantern in hand. That photo made my skin tingle. That night, when I returned to the field alone, I carried Thatcher's lamp, an exact replicating to greet him as an equal must. I lit it at the elm and stepped back. Minutes passed, then a slow clip-clop sounded, drawing near. The ghost reappeared, examined my lamp with a tilted head, then reached out and touched the glass. The flame flared bright, then died. His shape shimmered and faded into starlight. I never saw again the phantom patrol, but each fall I clean the elm's base and hang a lantern for Thatcher's final sweep on quiet nights I swear I hear hoofbeats drifting down the rows. A soft sigh of approval in the wind. And I know, somewhere beyond the fence, the landowner still rides, ensuring his field remains safe until spring blooms once more. That wraps up tonight's 10 stories. Now let the sound of the waves keep you company as you drift off. Sleep tight and sweet dreams.